dear Sai brothers and sisters, Sai Ram to all of you. Vijay mentioned my involvement with the Foundation of Truth. That's where I came to know of Swami, so it has a special place in my heart. The way that happened, a lot of people always want to know how you do come to Swami. And I was director and in charge of programming for that organization, so across my desk came this brochure that you could order a film from California, from Digbal. And it was on a holy man named Sai Baba. And of course that was strange to me at the time, but I thought this could be an interesting program after reading the description, so I ordered the program. And we looked for someone in Atlanta at the time. Now this was really around 77, late 76. And we looked for someone around Atlanta that knew Swami. We couldn't find anyone, but we had several people who knew of him. Well, anyway, we showed the film, and that film really convinced me of Swami's divinity for whatever reason. So that was my way to know Swami. And it created in me an urge to not only go to India to see him, but I felt that I could form a relationship with him at that point, which in my own way I did. But in the early days, I think that everyone is always seeing God more outside of themselves, not so much inside. And that was my case. But I felt that I could call on him if something was needed. And so it led to a miraculous interference with Swami in Aaron's birth, which happened in 77. Now the reason I didn't go to India immediately was because my wife was pregnant with Aaron at the time, and we had to wait until the birth and for him to be old enough to go. So really my first trip was in 79, not 76. It was Christmas. And the first time I saw Swami, it was amazing. There was a light around him. And it was just visual confirmation to me that this was God and that my search was over, that this was my path. My first real physical miracle with Swami was he was going to give a talk in Bangalore. Now, I was used to going to the darshans at Whitefield where there were maybe 1,000 people, a few hundred people or so. But when I arrived at this talk, there were 20,000 people there. And this was in 79, so I was a little surprised. But because I was a Westerner, I was allowed to sit up front. And where I was seated was an aisle separating the ladies and the men's, a major aisle. And Swami was going to give darshan after that, which he did. So after the talk, Swami comes right by where I am, and he starts to walk toward the masses. And he's taken maybe about 8 steps away from me. And I suddenly remembered that I had some vibhuti that I had purchased that day that I wanted him to bless. And so just suddenly, I just thought, Swami, vibhuti. He stops, turns around, comes back, and blesses the vibhuti. This was amazing to me because how could he know what I was thinking in the midst of all these thousands of people? You know, now, after many years, of course, it's not as dramatic, but I still even remember my thinking at the time. Now, during this talk, I'm going to use some quotes that were instrumental in formulating my relationship with Swami. And the first one is, "The divine can be grasped only through love. Reason is too feeble an instrument to measure it. Denial of the divine cannot negate it. Logic cannot reveal it. To the doubting or confused ones, I give this illustration. For those who wish to secure pearls from the sea, you must dive deep to secure them. It does no good to dabble among the shallow waves near the shore and say the sea has no pearls, and all stories about them are false. Likewise, if a person wants to secure the love and grace of this avatar, you must dive deep and get submerged in Sai Baba. Now, after the trip, we returned home, and of course, I told you that he had blessed this vibhuti. Well, I had a knee condition that had been a chronic source of pain for me for years. I had injured it even in high school, but it wasn't something, it was just like a stone bruise. It never totally got well. So I thought, well, I'm going to try this vibhuti on it. So I started applying vibhuti to the knee twice a day, saying a prayer to Swami each time. And at the end of a week, my knee was well. And I don't know if you've ever had a chronic condition where all of a sudden something's no longer with you that's been with you maybe for 20 years. Now, we had purchased a lot of books on Swami when we were there. And I was going through these books daily because I really couldn't get enough of Swami. Now, I had let's just say a Western background coming up, through Christianity. But I just couldn't get enough, and I just really loved him so much. And through reading those books and meditations and prayers and so forth, I started having Swami dreams. And there were up to 2 dreams each night. This went on for about 2 years, a year, and then they started decreasing. But what was interesting is they never happened in India when I visited Swami. It was only when I was in the United States. Now, I couldn't wait to get back to see Swami, so 6 months later I'm planning another trip. And this time my wife was involved with something to do with her mother, and she couldn't go. And so Erin went with me. A lot of you know Erin. And on that trip, the last thing she said was, "Be sure he doesn't get sick." Well, that's sort of like the kiss of death. So I was very conscientious about what he ate, everything. But then the last week, we were on about a 6-week trip, but the last week I let him have some ice cream on the streets of Bangalore. That's right. Well, that situation, he started developing, of course, diarrhea and dysentery. But it wasn't like what maybe a lot of us have experienced with Swami, because I've had severe cases of diarrhea there too. This really developed into what I would just say was amoebic dysentery. Now, I had a pharmaceutical background, so I knew the drugs of choice could cause liver or kidney disease. And Erin was a sensitive child, so I was very worried that would be the case. So I was really hoping Swami would do something. So the condition worsened. And so we're going to be at our last darshan that I can possibly take Erin to without going to the hospital, because it's that bad. And just before we went to darshan, Erin said to me he had to go to the toilet, which we did. And so the normal bloody mucus discharge and so forth. And so as a father, I'm very concerned. I'm really beyond concern. I'm losing it, so to speak. But I have a lot of faith in Swami. So we go to the darshan. Swami comes over to where we are, very nonchalantly. And he looks at me and I say to him, and these were the exact words, "Swami, my son is very ill. Will you please help?" And he just pushes into Erin and I. And he pushes back against us, so I'm holding Erin even like this. And he starts talking to these Italian people back of me, and I can remember his conversation. he said, when did you come? How many are you? And I'll be sure to see you when you leave, before you leave. And I remember my thoughts were, Swami, I have a life-death situation here. And you're talking to these Italians about an interview. And he steps back, and he again looks. And again I say to him, Swami, my son is very ill. Will you please help? And he just turns and walks away. And of course I'm thinking the worst. I'm thinking, well, here we go. Don't know how this is going to end. And so out of respect, you wait for Swami. This was at Whitefield, so you wait for Swami to go back to his residence. So we're just waiting. And then as the gate closes, Aaron looks up at me and says, I have to go to the toilet. And I'm thinking, well, that's not surprising. So I take him to the toilet. He has a perfectly normal bowel movement. He gets up and starts playing like none of this had ever happened. So that of course, solidified any doubts or whatever with Swami and me. And this brings me to another quote. The Lord is love itself. I have come to give to you the key of the treasure of bliss, to tell you how to tap the spring, for you have forgotten the way to blessedness. If you waste this chance of saving yourself, it is just your fate. You come to me for tinsels and trash, petty little cures and promotions, worldly joys and comforts. Very few of you come to get from me the thing I have really come to give, which is liberation itself. And even among those few, those who stick to the path of spiritual discipline and who ultimately succeed are a handful. I am aware of the future, the past, as well as the present of every one of you. So I am not so moved by mercy. Since I know the past, the background, my reaction is different. It is your consequence of evil deliberately done in the previous birth. So I allow your suffering to continue, often modified by some little compensation. I do not cause either joy or grief. You're the designer of both these chains that bind you. I am always full of bliss. Now the reason that quote really, you could spend a study circle, you can spend a lifetime on it. But it does, when you really analyze it, explain how Swami interacts with us in a way. I was in India once, and it seems that Swami would always answer whatever question I had in my mind in some way before the trip was over. And so this particular trip, it was the monsoon seasons, and it was raining every day. Now, one of the things I had always wanted was to see Swami control the weather. I had always heard about it and read about it, but I really physically wanted to see that. So what I was noticing was about an hour before darshan, the rains would stop. Now back then we had the sands in front of the mandir, it isn't as it is now. And so the sands would dry up just enough for us to be seated comfortably for darshan, and Swami would come out and give darshan. And this went on for days. And I knew that Swami was doing this, but in a way I wanted to see more. So one day, same procedure, Swami's giving darshan, but you're wondering why it's not raining, because it's just, the clouds are low, it just looks like it should be raining. And even as Swami was giving darshan, there was a little bit of mist in his hair. Now, Swami, can be mischievous, so he gives darshan and he walks toward the mandir, and then he gets right to where he's going to step up onto the veranda, and he's doing his pose and so forth, but this time he's smiling, he's laughing, and he's got a twinkle in his eye. So he steps up on the veranda, and just as he does, it just rains, just heavy. And he's up pointing and laughing, and then everybody's joyous because they knew that he did it. So he answered my wish that I would be able to witness this. Now, on one of my trips, Bettina Biggert, which most of you know or know of, she and I were really good friends, and we decided to take a group of people to see Swami. So it was going to be some people from Atlanta and the southeast area and from her area. So we met in Atlanta and proceeded from there. Now there was probably 12 to 14 people in the group. And so we traveled to India, and everyone that's been to India, of course, knows about jet lag and how at the end of the trip you just want to find somewhere to just be still. So we arrive in Bombay, Mumbai, and so for whatever reason, there were like 4 planes that landed at the same time, so customs was very crowded. And we were at the end of the line. And I'm thinking, wow, this is going to be a hassle, because you know we have new people with us that never been to India, and you're wanting them to be as comfortable as possible. And so I'm thinking, this is going to be a hassle. So, well, suddenly up to me walked this Indian gentleman. He was 5'2" or 3". But what was interesting is he was dressed all in white. He had a white suit, a white tie, white shoes, and even had white hair. So he comes up to me, I don't know why, and he says to me, "Are you here to see Sai Baba?" And I thought, well, this is unusual, but of course I said yes. And he says, "How many's in your group?" And I told him. And he says, "Follow me." So we went all the way around the customs line. We went all the way to the end. And there was a man there that stamped all of our passports. So we were in India without having to go through the hassle. Now, I had been filming Swami for a few trips at this time. And so my procedure was I would film for maybe 10, 12 days, and then I would stop and have a darshan just like everybody else. Instead of looking at Swami through a viewfinder, I would see him with my own eyes, so to speak. So at the end of about 12 days, I sat down, and Swami comes over and invites me for an interview, which means the group's invited. So we go to the interview room. Now, I'd always wanted to film an interview. So I have the camera with me, because you know you don't leave it outside. And as we get to the interview room, Swami looks at me and he says, "Leave your luggage here, sir." And there's some symbology with that when you're with Swami, you shouldn't have external thoughts and so forth. So I did. But in the interview, I told Swami, it sort of becomes everybody's time during an interview. I told Swami, I said, "Swami, I want to donate this camera to you." And he said, "I will take it when you finish with it. You use it while you're here, and I will take it when you leave." So again, I go back to what I know I should be doing, is filming daily. And then again, after about 14 days, I stop and I'm seated, and Swami invites me in for an interview again. So this time, you know, I'm still wanting to film an interview, but again, he says, "Leave your luggage here." So that ended that. But anyway, at the end of the trip, we go for our last interview, and I do take the equipment inside with me this time because I'm going to give it to Swami. So I'm thinking, because I have the equipment here, I'm going to try to film. So I'm starting to, you know, unpack a little, and Swami looks over at me and he says, "Not now, sir." So at the end of the interview, I give the camera to Swami. Now, Swami and I were the last to leave. And as we're leaving, Swami, with a twinkle in his eye, said, "You didn't have any problems with customs, did you?" So, it sort of makes you wonder whether you chose to give the camera or he had arranged it all the time, because, see, it wasn't on my passport, so I had not declared it or something. Now, on subsequent trips, boys told me that Swami would lend that camera out to his students to practice. So that was his word. Oh, I didn't mean to tell you that Swami told me, he says, "I have no need for a camera. I'm taking it for the boys." So, no, he didn't need the camera. Now, this brings us to, I want to talk a little bit about what happens in interviews. It's now, of course, these are impossible. In the old days, many people that went were able to experience that. But for those who haven't experienced or have wondered about it, I wanted to go into a little detail. Also, there were many lessons learned in the interview room. Now, what Swami does when he conducts an interview is he practices what he preaches. The first thing that happens when he comes into the interview room is he turns on the light and fan. And the last thing he does when he leaves, he turns the light and fan off. Now, the next thing he does is he materializes vibhuti for the ladies. And he would distribute it to the ladies. And after a few times, I wanted some of that vibhuti. And so Swami, of course, reads your thoughts. He doesn't need for you to say something. So I'm thinking this, and he looks over at me and he says, "For ladies only." However, after a few more interviews down the road, Swami reached over and gave me some vibhuti one day, just as a little tidbit between he and I. So in that case, I did get some of it. Now, one thing that Swami will say in an interview often is, "Everyone happy here?" And of course, that's a question here too. We are all happy that we can gather together and share Swami. But it caused me to wonder what Swami meant by happiness. And so that brings me to another quote. "Man's natural state is happiness, and he cannot be blamed for craving that which is his own. But man is making a serious mistake, for he feels that the happiness for which he seeks comes from objects which he can experience. What is the remedy? The remedy is to consider the truth that there is only one everlasting, never-failing happiness, and that is God. To drink of that ever-flowing spring of happiness, you must turn to yourself, to the divine, which, however obscured, is the resident of your heart, the subtle truth of your being. Love is the vital and essential reality of spiritual life. In human life, love takes a number of various aspects. Love for the wife and children, love for various habits and indulgences, love for various objects, and love for God. God is love, and he is there in every aspect of love. Although love, which is God, appears to be modified and even distorted in man, yet truly that divine love remains pure and perfect. The love for man which is pure and perfect is his love for God. Only love for God is perfect. Gather your love from all aspects of your life and let it flow as one strong, deep river of love for God. Peace and happiness shall be yours. Now, in the interview room, Swami will do a couple of materializations usually. And these can be varied objects. I've seen watches, a lot of rings, earrings, medallions, pendants, and japamalas. The next thing he does is he will have or discuss spiritual topics. And these topics will be brief talks that he will give about practical spirituality. Now, at this point, there's a video that I produced called 1991 Talk to Westerners. And that is the closest thing I've ever seen to a real interview with Swami. At that time, he called a group of Westerners at Kodaikanal in for a talk. Now, many things that he said in that video, he has said in the interview room. So for those who want to know what his spiritual topics part of the interview is like, you can view that video and you can get an idea. I'm going to cover a couple of things that I remember him saying. First thing was, who are you? Self-inquiry, of course. And he would say, you're not the mind, you're not the body. And he would hold up a handkerchief. And he said, this is my handkerchief, but this isn't me. And he says, what is the handkerchief made of? And of course, it was a rhetorical question. And he would answer it and say, it's made of threads. And then he said, what makes the threads? And he said, cotton. And then he said, cotton is like our thoughts. The threads are like our desires. The cloth is like our mind. Remove the threads and you have no mind, thy mind. He would caution also about, and I think we are all guilty of this, he would just about every interview talk about, we talk too much. He said there's too much talking. And he says you're forming relationships and you come all this way and Swami is here and Swami loves you, but you are talking too much. He said relationships are not important. Only relationship with God is important. Now this brings me into another thing that he said. He even phrased it like this. He said, you can have Jesus, you can have Buddha, you can have Rama, you can have Krishna. You can have whoever you choose, but one path, one name, one form, not two. Now, I think our minds, we tend to seek outside of ourselves too much. And so, I know that devotees are tempted or even inclined to seek spiritual advice or guidance somewhere else. But Swami is the absolute. There is nothing that Swami is not. He's mother, father, brother, sister. He's everything. And in a way, why do you want to dilute what he's offering by seeking somewhere else? Now, I mention this because I love you. And it wouldn't matter to me, or it doesn't matter to me that others do this. It's just I'm saying what Swami said in the interview room and what he said directly to me. So it's my duty to pass that message on. What you do with it, that's up to you. Now, the last thing that, as the speaker said last night, the answer to the question, who are you, is you are God. And Swami would make this point in the interview room. And I'll be honest, at first, even back then, it was alien to me to conceive that I was God. But that's what he said. So if he said it, you had to sort of pursue it. And he would say it in such a way, you're God. Know you're God. And then he would even clench his fist and say, be determined. So, but of course that concept carries with it some accountability, because if you state that or start to believe it, you have to become more Swami-like. You have to You're accountable for your actions. Another quote. The avatar takes a human form and behaves in a human way so that humanity can feel kinship with divinity. At the same time, he rises to godly heights so that mankind can also aspire to reach God. The realization of the indwelling God is the task for which avatars come in human form. Now, Bettina Biggert was a really good friend of mine, and we would share Swami stories. And in a way, I'm trying to remember her a little bit here today because she was really vital in forming this region. And I don't know, I just had a great appreciation for her, and I hate that she's no longer with us. But I was talking with her one time, and I said, Bettina, what is the most interesting thing you have ever asked Swami? And she said, I once asked Swami, she said, Swami, it isn't possible for you to know everything about everybody all the time. It's just not possible. How do you do that? So I'm going to give you an answer. Now, this is the way Swami does it. This is Swami's response to her. He says, I know what I want to know. So there you have it. That's I was in an interview once, and I was observing Swami talking to this lady, and he said to her, your husband's business, it's up, it's down. He's always got financial problems, but he doesn't consult me. What can I do? Now, if you really think about that, do we consult him constantly, or do we just consult him when it's convenient or when we really have a great need? What it meant to me was I needed to deepen my relationship with Swami. Now, there are many ways you can do this, of course. You all know about the sadhanas, but maybe just taking that as something from the conference, make more effort to deepen your relationship with Swami. And I know that it works for me, but now I'm going to use a Jesus quote here to set up this next interaction in the interview room. Jesus once asked one of his followers, not one of his disciples, Nicodemus, he said, what is the greatest commandment? And his response was, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, body, and soul. And Jesus said to him, well said. You're not far from the kingdom of heaven. But I give you another commandment, no less great. Thou shalt love thy brother as thyself. Now, going into the interview room, Swami once said to us collectively, he said, we're going to do some spiritual math. And he said, what is 1 and 1? Now, some of you may know this answer, but at the time I didn't. But I knew from my interactions with Swami, unless you ask directly, you're going to get it wrong, so you might as well just listen. And so, of course, a few of the people unfamiliar with that spoke up, 1 and 1 is 1, Swami, da-da-da. Swami said, no. He said, 1 and 1 is we. We and we are one. So then that quote of Jesus makes sense when you think about it. Through love, which is what we're sharing here at this conference, love for each other, that becomes we. See, it's like the organization. It's not my organization. It's not your organization. It's our organization. And I know that from a fact that Swami prefers group effort instead of individual effort. So in a way, through learning to love each other here, we can take that into the outer world and apply it more evenly there. So I don't know. I know that I just love each and every person here. Now, I think what happens when you do become involved with Swami really deeply, you start wishing for others what you have for yourself. And I can't think of anything that would be more important than everyone having as deep a relationship with Swami as possible. I know that he's my everything, but that's from years. I remember many times he would tell me things that were applicable, but I wasn't really ready to do. However, when it did become that I was ready to do them, he would make sure that I did. I'd always wondered about Swami's ability to speak all languages, because being there so much, I saw lots of different groups go in to see Swami, Italians, so forth. And so one day Swami invited me in for an interview, and it was interesting that only Swami and I, and then the rest of the group were Italians. And he had this lady translating what he was saying in English into Italian. But what happened was when she would mess the translation up, Swami would provide her with the correct Italian word and our phrase. And so in a way, I'm watching Swami speak Italian. And so I don't know if he can speak all languages. I do know he knows Italian. I was in an interview once, and I would try to set up as close to Swami as possible. And he was materializing a japamala over my head. And I remember seeing the japamala form, and he was about to catch it, and then I was no longer there. I was in another state. I was in a state of absolute bliss, awareness. There was no time, no space. There was just beingness, awareness. There was no duality. And then I was back in the interview room later with consciousness. But in that moment, I knew what liberation was. I had glimpsed the state of awareness. And of course, Swami had precipitated that. But I can even now, at times when my mind's quiet, almost get back to that, but I can't get totally back to it. But I mention it because, in a way, that's our goal. And that's where we're all headed. Now, when we get there, that's up to Swami and ourselves, I think. Also, when in the early interviews, I wanted Swami to give a message for the sinner. And so I asked him in the interview room, I said, Swami, what message can I take back to the sinner? And this is what he replied on 2 different occasions. He said, tell them to do more service. So in a way, no matter how much we are doing, compared to what Swami does, we're still lacking. So this brings me to another quote that does explain this. Sai seeks only one thing, that you should love your fellow man and serve society. Sacrifice your selfishness. Try to come to the rescue of those in need. So if you really want to understand your true spiritual nature, plunge into service. Know that serving man is serving God. Love grows through service. Love finds expression in service. And love is God. I'm going to tell you a quick story. Everybody likes adversity. So I'm on the veranda waiting for an interview one day, and Swami approaches, and he steps up on the veranda, and he walks over toward me, and his hand goes back, and he just slaps me like you can't believe. It knocks me back even. And of course, my attitude is interaction with Swami is good, but Swami this didn't happen by accident. So I knew there was something up, of course. Now, what was interesting, I had the presence of mind. You know, a lot of the older devotees are on the veranda all the time. And so I heard a couple of them laughing, you know, like, yeah, Swami's beating up this American, you know, maybe he hit him again. And when he hit me, Swami said, monkey mind, mad monkey mind. And he raised his hand like, I ought to hit you again. And then he went on, and everyone went into the interview room. And so I'm, you know, of course, my mind is working like, you know, what's going to happen. And so it sort of becomes everybody's time in the interview room to have some attention. He turned to me and he said, well, I said to him, Swami, I have a problem with anger. And he said, not only anger, lust, envy, greed, hate, pride, all of them. And, you know, again, he was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with you. And so thinking quickly and really humbly, I said to Swami, Swami, what can I do? And so then he became the mother. He totally changed. And he said, don't worry. When you learn to see God in everyone, you won't be so affected by these things. Now, I think that was a message for everyone, but see, what I took from that is there's time for us to change. We don't have to do it all at once. But Swami does expect us to move forward. So if you have some challenges, face them and just ask Swami to help. But see, in a way, that was a confirmation to me that he was going to see me through these things, which most of them have gone away. There's a couple left. So with that, I guess my time is up. Thank you for allowing me to share with you. And I love each and every one of you dearly.